Welcome to the Create the Life You Want podcast, where we break down the journey of people just like you going from dream to ownership in business acquisitions, franchises, and startups. I'm your host, Jeremy Ames. Today's episode is brought to you ad-free by Guidant Financial. Guidant is America's leading company helping aspiring entrepreneurs use retirement funds to buy or start businesses. If you're committed to buying or starting a business, you can find out more about your funding options by going to www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. Now, let's get started with the show. I'm super excited to hear about your story. It sounds like you have had an inkling to be an entrepreneur for most of your life and come from an entrepreneurial family. And so I really want to hear about the genesis of how you sort of grew up in that environment and how long you've known you wanted to be a business owner and what was the catalyst, the moment at which it sort of switched for you and you said, now's the time.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for your time here today. I appreciate it and kind of happy to share my story and a little bit about my background. Like I had mentioned it in a couple of notes, I'm actually part of a family business that goes back over 100 years, believe it or not, that's currently run by actually one of my nephews as well as my cousin. So that's fantastic. It's down the coast of Oregon, and it was started by my grandfather quite some time ago. Both of which, all of the kids, meaning my father, was also involved, as well as myself when growing up, before it was sold after my father's passing when I was 19. So I always knew that I would be coming back to business ownership, and even throughout my corporate career, have already been drawn to that entrepreneurial side, which is why I'd gone into financial services, where I specialized in working with business owners, and then eventually moved into leadership and more senior leadership roles. As far as what brought me to this point, I always knew I would be coming back. And even at the firm that I was at, I owned a very small portion of the firm, but it was a nice sizable portion of the firm. And that I'd be using that at some point to actually move into purchasing our own business. So that was held in our 401k plan. And I'd always intended to move forward with the Rob's transaction to do it. And years ago, when I ran across you folks, that's why I turned to you and we found the right business.
So was this company you were part of before, did it have an ESOP? Is that?
Did. So it was an ESOP. Believe it or not, the gentleman that started it a long time ago, I think it was in the 30s, he was actually instrumental in some of the ESOP laws being passed. So
Really?
he had been married. He had started up a financial services firm that had done well and ended up becoming a billionaire in the process. In the late 60s, when his wife passed, at that time, estate tax laws were such that taxes were due, and he had to sell part of the business. So as part of his succession planning, his intent was always to basically give away the company to the employees. So upon his passing, that's exactly what happened. And the proceeds ended up going into, or I should say the stock was into ESOP, and other assets were actually given to charity at that time. So his name was Charles Salmons, kind of had an interesting background, but he really felt that employee ownership was key to driving success for a firm and also having an entrepreneurial spirit, which is one of the reasons I joined that company.
Right on. And how long did you work there for?
Oh gosh, over a decade. Well over a decade, and was in a leadership role on both the sales and marketing side before COVID hit. I used to fly around and travel extensively, which was fun until it wasn't. And I kept seeing the airport from my boat during COVID, and I went, I think I'm done. I don't think I want to travel around anymore.
How did you know when it was time? Because you've had this thought in the back of your head for a while. What made you say now's the moment?
I'd say there's three things, really. One of which is you just kind of have to be wired that way and ready to move on to that next step. And that's a personal decision. So it's a matter of where do you want to go with your career. I knew at that particular point, COVID kind of brought it a little early. I just was like, it's time. If I found the right firm, that's the second point is having, and finding the right firm that's available and the right kind of partnership with those who are selling it. I'd looked at several businesses previously, actually even offered on one, but never really came to terms. And the third is obviously having access to the funds in order to do it. So kind of combination of all three coming together at once brings you to that point. So in my case, I had the funds. I certainly had the interest. It happened to also be finding the right firm, which we did.
So help me understand the timing of how all of those things work. Did you find out about a funding option before, and then once you knew you had the funding sort of figured out, then you started proactively looking at opportunities? Sounds like you looked at many opportunities. So help us understand the timeline of what things came first and what time period this is happening over.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I come from a slightly different background than most people because I come from financial services where I'm very familiar with retirement plans, ESOPs, ERISA rules, and even Rob transactions, and advised clients, both from an advisor standpoint as well as even more from a leadership standpoint on those types of transactions. So I would say I'm a little bit more unique than some clients coming in as I'm already familiar with all of
Yeah.
it, both the benefits and also the rules that need followed. And I've always said, it's like, having the Department of Labor upset at you is really not a good idea.
Yeah.
So you really, really want to make sure when it comes to your retirement plans that you're following the rules and that you have a good administrator to work with and a good firm that you're partnering doing it, especially when it comes to transactions like this one. So I already knew that it was legally possible. I knew about a lot of the rules associated with it. It wasn't something I practiced in every day, which is why I was familiar with Guidant. So from that standpoint, I would say I kind of had the cart before the horse, if you will. I already
Yeah.
knew how to do that. The funding was already in place from investments and savings. And so when it came to the business transaction side, that's also something I'm very familiar with because I'd advised business owners and even a long time ago gone through our own. So I was somewhat familiar with that process, if you will. But in terms of it all coming together, I would say what normally happens is somebody's reached that point in their career where they kind of want to move on to the next step. They kind of want to control their own destiny and run their own firm, if you will, which means you're going to work even harder and even longer than probably you did before, but it'll be a lot of fun in the process. And then it's starting to examine, okay, where do I get the funding for this? And then if you're going to proceed with this style of transaction, you definitely want to look into the details and look into the details of the firm that you'd be partnering with, not just day one, but ongoing. It's the ongoing administration in particular that's critical along with the initial transaction itself.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've known for a while and thought, hey, this is my funding path of how I'm going to get into a
Correct.
business. How long ago did you look at your first company and how did you come across it? Were you just sort of reactively as you met people going, hey, this might be interesting? Or did you start actually talking to people with the intent of trying to make offers? And how long ago was this? What I'm trying to do is break down your process. I'm doing this with
Yeah.
many of our clients to help other people understand how they might think about their own path.
Yeah, so I would say going into my career in financial services, which is very entrepreneurial to start with, I knew I would be within that for a period of time. I actually came across an opportunity, shoot, probably 20 years ago that I had an initial conversation about, but I would say that it was more of an opportunity that happened to cross my path with the right owner.
Yep.
It did not make sense at that point in my career to move forward with, as well as that particular business had some issues that I called to be a deal killer. So we didn't end up going down that path and continued on with my career. I would say the first thing to consider is whichever you want to direction you go with your career, whether it's working, I guess, in a firm or owning your own, you kind of have to decide when you're ready to take that step of ownership, and that it's important to you because a lot comes along with it. And obviously, for most people, they understand whether it's a small firm or a large firm, you have a lot of responsibilities that even in my former role that I worked a tremendous number of hours that I didn't have to worry about making payroll. I
Yeah.
didn't have to worry about things like some tax issues and things like that that I already was very familiar with. So I'd say the very first step is just making sure, hey, is that a type of opportunity I really want to jump into? And anyone considering it, I'd recommend speaking with some other business owners, especially business owners in the field you're looking to jump into long before kind of making that decision, which is some of what I did. I just had that opportunity because I worked with business owners, but I also spoke with a number of them too before ultimately end up making that transition.
So let me back up. It sounds like 20 years ago, you came across a business opportunity. That was the first one you ever looked at. Didn't really
Yeah.
pencil. And then the other ones that you came across, like the one you said you made an offer on, was that one from business owners you were just working with and it sounded like they wanted to leave or exit? Or were you doing something else to go and search out potential businesses to buy?
Yes, I had already made that decision at that point. It was a matter of when I would exit from my career at that point in corporate America. And so then it was a matter of either from folks that I knew or outreach on my own, whether it's, online and doing your own research in that fashion, business brokers, as well as just if there's a specific industry you're looking at and reaching out directly to business owners themselves, based on what you may know about it. So there's a number of different ways to go about it. To answer your question specifically, it came from either one personal contact to actual business brokers that I became very familiar with,
Okay.
and one other that I had reached out to was a business owner directly.
Okay. So you got a little bit of everything. You had
Yeah,
at least one opportunity that you were looking at that was reactive, someone you just knew in your network, at least a couple that came from business brokers. So you had gone
right,
out and built relationships with a few local business brokers, letting them know
right.
that you were looking for a business. And then a third one, it sounds like, came because you saw a business and then you reached out to that individual business owner. Where did you find the business you ultimately ended up buying? Which of those three buckets?
That's a great question. So it actually came through a business broker,
Okay.
was the one that I ended up purchasing. And we're actually looking at making another acquisition that'd be complementary to who we are in terms of growing our revenue. And so we've continued this search using the methods I just talked about, all of which can be very effective, in reaching
And
out to somebody directly. And sometimes that's just a blind outreach. Sometimes it's just knowledge about a specific industry and knowing that at some point that somebody's like, you know what, I don't really have someone else. And it kind of reached the point where they're thinking of retiring. And sometimes that word kind of gets around and doesn't hurt reaching out to somebody.
yeah, so let's dig into when you did the outreach to the
Yeah.
business directly. What did that look like? How did you decide this was a business you wanted to reach out to, and what did you do to get in touch with the seller? Or I guess he
Yes.
potentially wasn't even a seller at that point.
Yeah, he wasn't. He still hasn't actually. At that particular juncture, I had heard through another source that I knew that this particular individual was looking to possibly retire. Didn't have a
Okay.
succession plan necessarily in place outside of another. It was another wholesale distributor of beverages in this case, who had possibly looking to sell to a competitor. So I knew from my source that, this is a person that didn't really have a plan, was considering it, but hadn't really decided. And so I just did a blind outreach, first in letter, then in email, and then we had a conversation. And from that conversation, it didn't quite make sense to go much further. But that's a very common way to go about it, if you will.
Yeah.
Others that I've
What
seen, they've just done blind outreach, whether it's been an actual business broker or the individual themselves. And typically that's done email or letter.
what worked to get that business owner's attention? Did he respond to the letter or the email or some combination of both?
I would say yes, meaning all of the above.
All of the above. Okay.
Um, yeah, most folks won't immediately take a call. um, so I'd say ultimately the outreach by phone is what ended up moving us forward and scheduling the appointment, but it was the outreach through both email and letter as well, and a
Well,
fair amount of patience on my part
yeah.
and persistency.
What does patience and persistence look like in this particular case?
This particular case, knowing the individual, I had started off with an email, didn't really get much response. I had followed up with a letter. I had followed up by phone, then with the office themselves, and then continued to contact, and eventually ended up with an appointment after about 6 weeks in this case.
Okay, 6 weeks of stalking. That's pretty good.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to coming from a business owner background myself, and working with a lot of business owners on the transition of their own. You have to understand this isn't a financial transaction for somebody who owns a business for a long period of time. This is, I like to say, a member of the family, so to
Yeah.
speak. So no matter how that business may be good, bad, or indifferent, this is something they've put a lot of time, effort, and energy in. And I think we have to be sensitive to that. And be, cognizant of that when having these conversations, because for them, it's not just about the money, even though they do want to get a check and leave.
Yeah.
It's a lot more to it than that. I'd like to say it has to be the right business, but the other half is I have to have the right partner, meaning the right seller. And if there's a match between the two, then I'm probably going to be able to move forward. If one of those two don't match, that deal's probably not getting done.
So it sounds like you have a real empathy and understanding of what it's like to be on the other side of the table. So how was that
Yeah.
reflected in your approach? Like what were you putting in your email? How were you outreaching that was taking that into account?
It's a great question. What I'd say is put yourself in their shoes first. What would appeal to you if you were selling your business, if you were looking to kind of take that next step and stepping out? Sometimes there was one other where I just approached them and say, I'd love to meet with you, which was an honest truth to get their take on the industry. And also let them know that, hey, we're looking to acquire a business of this size. If you were ever interested, we'd be interested in having that conversation as well. And ended up joining them over a cup of coffee. Turns out they really weren't interested in selling. They already had a succession plan in place, but it led to some really interesting conversations, where actually I ended up kind of doing a little consulting work for them in a direction they wanted to go. So you
Oh,
never really
nice.
know. A lot of times it's just take a moment to get to know somebody. It's kind of like dating.
Yeah.
It's taking a moment to get to know somebody over a cup of coffee and having a conversation. And if approached from that standpoint, you'll find out if it makes sense to go any further with them.
What I find fascinating about this example is that you got the insight to reach out to this person from someone in your network. So, what were you doing within your network that was helping people understand, hey, I'm looking for a business. What ideas do you have for me?
Yeah, so I knew specifically in exactly what I was looking for
In terms
within a
of
specific
industry or
industry.
business size, like what was the target?
Yeah, so this particular one came up. We knew we were going to be in wholesale distribution focused in, where am I going with this? Wholesale distribution focused in on beverage or foods of a specific type.
Okay.
And we were looking for a business owner that either was looking to exit or sell off a part of their business. Revenue wise, someone probably around million five, maybe on up to three. Transaction size up to 1.5 million was our cap. So this is a smaller firm and an acquisition opportunity for us to add into our existing business at that time. Originally, when I bought this company, what I was looking for was a platform company, something that already had some issues that I knew I could enhance and frankly fix
Yeah.
and kind of take that next step, but had some basic things in place, some of the right employees, some of the right markets, some of the right customers, if you will, but one that I knew I could also grow or purchase another acquisition and fold into without having to get new staff, new building,
Yeah.
all of those fun things that kind of made sense. Hopefully that
So,
answered your question. I'm not 100% sure if I
yeah, but
did.
it's going to lead to another question here, David, because I'm curious how you figured this out for yourself. Like, what thinking process did you go through to determine this is the type or industry that I'm looking for? This is the size of business that I'm looking for. Break down for us how you worked out what you were really focused on to hone in that search.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I had a lot of opportunities in the financial services side, but I just kind of want to do something different. And I decided, okay, if I want to do something there, it'll be doing some consulting for fun because I happen to enjoy it. Not something I necessarily want to do every single day. The other part is, quite honestly, the earnings multiples at which those businesses were priced were extraordinarily high, and they're tied to the financial markets, which I just didn't see a lot of great value in that particular point, and there was tremendous risk actually. So I really didn't want to go down that direction. I knew wholesale distribution extremely well, both in terms of some of my background growing up, as well as even my career and what I was doing. But the products obviously were going to be quite a bit different.
Yeah.
So what I was looking for is something we were passionate about, something we were interested in, something we loved. We happened to travel extensively throughout Europe and loved things over there. We love coffee. We love fine Italian products. We like to eat and go do things like that, as well as other passions that I had. Years ago, the business I looked at happened to be, believe it or not, a boat distributorship, but that's
Okay.
because I happen to love boats and passionate about it. They're not necessarily great businesses, but they are a lot of fun.
So I
So
heard,
coming back to your question, this particular one, wholesale distribution tied into products that we were very passionate about. Even if we didn't necessarily know everything about the products, I knew that part we could be learning with the right people in place.
so it sounds like you felt comfortable with wholesale distribution. You actually looked at other business models in that vein,
Correct.
and you liked the valuation of those types of businesses better than the
Correct.
financial services or consulting that you were in. What drove the size conversation? Was it really available funds that you wanted to invest, or were you just looking for something in a particular range because it represented, you think, the best opportunity to get the kind of valuation you were looking for? Help us understand how you
Yeah,
identified that.
I'd say yes to both of those questions. So I knew the industry coming out of COVID had a lot of challenges. In fact, a lot of
Mm,
people didn't survive coming through COVID in particular, either on the wholesale side or what I'd call the retail side, dealing with food services. It was extremely difficult. Still is challenging. There also was tremendous opportunity. So it also happened to be, in a strange way, probably one of the best stress tests you could ever place on a business. And if a business could make it through that, come out the other side, even if it still had issues, was probably pretty darn viable and probably attractive from a purchase standpoint. So to answer your question, part of it really came from the opportunity at the right price. There was a certain size I was looking for. I wasn't really able to locate that.
okay.
So I ended up going with a different size, knowing that we would continue to grow and then we would acquire opportunities as they presented themselves.
Okay, so sounds like you saw a market and an opportunity that you thought might be undervalued at the moment, given the current
Correct.
circumstances around COVID. And sounds like the transaction you landed on was a little bit smaller than what you were targeting in the first place. So we talked a little bit about one of these direct solicitation offers that you went down the path of. Tell us how you found a business broker to work with, and then what that process looked like when you started to get some businesses to review from that broker.
Yeah, so I got involved with business brokers initially when starting to look at businesses. You get to know them and know them somewhat well. You let them know, here's what I'm looking for. You end up filling out information in terms of who you are, financial background. Any type of business you look at, you're going to have to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you get any information. And so you become familiar with the process and some of the people. As a result, they end up getting to know you a little bit. And so if opportunities present, they'll reach out to you because obviously they're trying to find the right match and sell the business as well. And that
Yeah.
took a little bit of a period of time. So at first, it was simply reaching out to them. And then I started hearing from select brokers that I got along well with and thought well of when opportunities presented themselves.
What did that timeline look like from when you decided you wanted to actively pursue a business to when you were at a point where you found the business you ultimately moved forward with purchasing?
That's a great question. Actually, it took several years.
Okay. So you're still
Yeah.
working your day job at this point and you're doing this on the side. So that this is a common thing that happens with people. So help us
Yeah.
understand, how did you think about time allocation to this?
I mean, that's a great question. So obviously, I was doing my professional career, and it involves a lot of hours. It involves a lot of
Yeah.
travel. So it was also at that point I got familiar with a couple of business brokers, and it was keeping my eye out for the right opportunity, whether it's talking to them or doing some search online. Or I had the opportunity, as I mentioned, I met with a lot of business owners. So obviously, kind of keeping an eye on that as well. So I didn't have a formal search, if you will, with a certain set number of hours that I was going after that. I would say mine was probably more opportunistic
Okay.
from that standpoint. And then at a certain juncture, I just said, okay, we really do want to kind of increase the time on this and find the right opportunity. And we ended up finding the right one at that point.
So, what made you decide to increase? Was it that you were not getting results with the passive approach to it? Or was there something else that drove the, okay, it's time to get serious now?
It's more a business decision. I've
Okay.
gone through some health events 10 years ago that kind of got me thinking about it, that fortunately got taken care of. COVID really made me think twice about that and that experience and
Yeah.
going, you know what? We only have one lap around this track of life. When is the right time? So I decided that, hey, it's now or never type of thing. So probably we should get serious about this. Not that we weren't serious before, but it was one of allocating more time towards it.
So when did you end up purchasing the business?
A little over 2 years ago, I ended up
2 years ago. So
finishing
2022.
the transaction. Yes.
Yeah. And from the time frame that you got serious to the time when you actually executed the purchase of the business, how long did that take?
Probably about 9 months.
9 months. Okay. So
Yeah,
you've been
not
in
super
COVID
long.
for a year-ish, and you're having this epiphany, hey, I've had this dream and I haven't done anything with it. And wait a second, how much time do I really have to go out there and pursue my dreams? Love that. Got
Yeah.
motivated to go out there. And then what happened? How many businesses did you look at? How many did you put offers on? And how did you ultimately end up deciding on the one that you move forward with?
That's a great question. Quite honestly, I've forgotten how many we looked at. In terms of initial viewing of them, if you will, there were three in particular that we looked at extremely closely. Um,
All
and
distribution companies in food and bev?
One was not. It was in the
Okay.
same field, but it actually happened to be retail that would also move into wholesale distribution.
Okay.
So I was looking at it from the standpoint, ideally, you'd have wholesale distribution, could acquire retail if you wanted, or you could start with retail and move into wholesale distribution.
Got it.
So this particular one was focused on the coffee side. Not uncommon that, and they were making their own, roasting their own coffee. So it's not uncommon then to branch into wholesale distribution,
Yeah.
which is where I was looking to bring my skill set. So that particular one, we got close to an offer. It was clear the owners weren't quite ready or at a number that made sense. So we held off making a formal written offer at that point. And ultimately we ended up going forward with this opportunity that we obviously made a formal written offer and closed the deal.
Yeah. So walk us through that. How did you
Yeah,
decide that this was the one, and what did that process of negotiating to an offer look like for you?
you bet. So this particular business, it's a wholesale distributor, as I mentioned, of fine Italian coffee and foods. And we knew that's what we were looking for in terms of wholesale distribution. We knew the industry that we wanted to be in. It was kind of a bonus that it would involve some travel to places that we absolutely love. That didn't hurt.
Yep.
That wasn't the primary driver of the business. So we had reached out to the business broker in this particular case, executed the NDA, and got the preliminary document and taking a look at it and taking a look at the numbers. And in looking at the numbers, even though the size wasn't quite what we wanted, I thought it could make some sense. And so it made sense to go actually meet with the owners themselves. So during the first conversation, it's kind of like a first date. So you get to know each other a little bit. There's specific questions you're looking to ask. But I also was trying to find out, what are they really looking for in somebody to purchase their business? And
Yeah.
am I that right person? And are they the right partner that's actually going to be here through this transaction that I trust is going to give me the right information, but also is going to be there for a short period of time through the training period, as opposed to collecting a check and you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
Coming into an industry where we didn't know everything about those products specifically, that was important to us, as well as in any distribution business. Relationships and transitioning those relationships are really important.
Yeah.
So to go further, we ended up actually going on site, and after a couple of meetings came to terms and put everything together into a formal agreement.
And so how did you get comfortable with the financial numbers to make an offer? Is that something just with your background you felt really comfortable doing yourself,
Yeah.
or did you work with someone to help support you on that?
My background, I'm extremely comfortable doing that because I've done it for a long time. So business evaluation is something I already know how to do and I'm very
Yeah.
familiar with it. So I didn't have to engage somebody to help me from an evaluation standpoint. And also, I'm very familiar with tax and legal documents as well. But even having said that, I still engage with our CPA and also obviously our attorney as well through that process, and they assisted us with that.
And what were you looking for when you were reviewing the financials of these businesses? Were there certain ratios or How are you thinking about what made sense to move forward and offer on?
Yeah, so depending on the industry, so given the specific industry and style of business, typically there's certain KPIs, certain metrics, if you will, that businesses are managed by. And to know those kind of benchmarks, if you will, most places have an industry association of some form, or you can find those benchmarks online. And so that in looking at the actual business, other than sales and the income that's being kicked off, the seller discretionary earnings, things like the gross margin, how often are they turning inventory in this particular type of business, whatever key performance indicators are for that specific business or industry, you're going to want to know what those are so you can benchmark them compared to what you're looking at. To answer your question, the documents themselves, you'll end up receiving a summary typically of the last 3 years of financials. Most business brokers will present those, or if you're working directly with an owner, you can ask for those. Sometimes you'll get tax returns, surprisingly. Other times you'll get a summary, and then the tax returns, you'll take a look at those during the due diligence process.
Yeah. And so you get the financials back, you're evaluating the seller discretionary earnings to sort of determine what you think the value is based on a multiple. Were there any specific KPIs you looked for? And if so, where did you find what those matching KPIs should be for this particular industry?
Yes. So to answer that question, where did I go to get the information? I just hopped online. Believe it or
Okay.
not, you can do searches out there. You'll find industry associations, like in coffee. The Specialty Coffee Association deals with roasters. They deal with retailers. They deal with anybody in the specialty coffee industry, and they actually have publications out there that you can purchase, or sometimes you just get enough through an article where you can pick up that information. And you can take that approach to pretty much any industry where you can
Yeah.
get some of those KPIs and start learning about it, or learning if you're not familiar. I definitely would find out what metrics are really important. And in looking at any business, there should be one number in particular that could be really important that drives value for a business. So in a
Yeah.
wholesale distributor, it's the number of accounts. It's
Okay.
things like your inventory turn, your gross margin, things of that nature. Some businesses are going to be a little bit different in terms of what those actual numbers are that you're looking at. So the short answer is I found some of that online, some of it I already intuitively knew. So when I was looking at the actual numbers for the business itself, I could pretty quickly benchmark it and go, okay, this looks pretty good, or this doesn't look so hot.
Yeah. So you made the offer, you move forward in the transaction. What kind of due diligence did you do on the business?
Yeah, in particular, with one, any business coming through COVID, obviously it had an impact. And like I said, our
Mhm.
industry in particular in food services has had a huge impact. So you kind of had to take a look at that due diligence pre-COVID, post-COVID. Okay, what was it doing before COVID? What did it do coming out of COVID? And how is it recovered? And how is it doing now? So to answer your question, the due diligence process, tax returns to see if they actually matched with the financial summary documents that I received. A lot of questions going into I'm a distributor, so I want to know about my vendor contracts. Are they exclusive?
Yeah.
What are some of those details that are associated with it? In working with, we're working with other business owners, what are the accounts? How many accounts? What are the sales for each of those accounts? And what have they been kind of historically? Things of that nature. So there were other things that were looked into and we asked about, but that was kind of some of the starting points.
And is this another area with due diligence where you just felt personal comfort based on your background, or where you leveraged one or more other people to help support you in that process?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit it's easier for me because I'm used to that because of my
Yeah.
background. Doing that kind of due diligence analysis is just something that comes second nature because of my background. But even with that, I still consulted with my CPA just to get a second opinion, and another business owner that actually knew, and saying, hey, here's kind of what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking. What do you think type of thing? He was one of my key advisors, if you will.
Okay.
So I could do that. Also happened to be a family member. So
Okay. Well, that
that
helps.
was always nice from
That's
that
the right price,
standpoint.
David.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean that didn't hurt. But having said that, I'm not opposed to engaging other professionals. You get what you pay for, and I'm a firm believer in hiring the right experts if you don't have the expertise or access to it to get their opinion. Because when purchasing a closely held business, there's a lot to look at, and you don't
Yeah.
have to be the expert. But I certainly, in putting together your team, have a qualified CPA, qualified attorney, someone else you trust from a business standpoint to bounce things off of are always helpful folks to have around.
Yeah. And so you move forward and close this transaction to buy this distributorship.
Yeah.
You said that you didn't have great knowledge of the product. And so there was some concern with, hey, is the seller going to stick around and help support us in the transition? So what did you end up negotiating in your deal? Can you walk us through what you decided to propose and what you locked in with that seller to create that transition for you to take over the business? And was that a seller note? Was it an earn out? Was it some other type of consulting agreement? Like how did that take shape?
Yeah, that's a great question and a big one. It actually starts early on in the first meeting. I ask, what are they looking for in somebody who may buy their business? What do they want in that person? Is it just a check so they can head to Hawaii? Is it somebody that can take over their baby and continue what they've started, or is it something else? As somebody buying a business, I want to hear, honestly, it's, hey, this is my baby. This is part of my family. This is something I want to continue on. My employees are important to me, and maybe everything they're telling you is 100% accurate. Maybe it's not, or maybe they just haven't thought it through fully. But you're wanting somebody who's engaged in the process. And it's not that they're looking to stay there and come knock on the door every day, but it is somebody that this is important to me to hand off to the right person. Because that type of business owner is going to actually do the consulting or actually pick up the phone if you happen to call them and say, hey, I got a question. What do you think? Type of thing.
Yeah.
It's not that it's bad that somebody wants to check and to head to Hawaii. It's just better be a business that you really know well, or at least have a consultant that you can bring in or someone else that you're paying to assist you with that process, because it might not be the business owner in that particular case. So in our instance, we had some great folks that it was important to them. This was their baby. They wanted to make sure that it was handed off to the right people, but they also wanted to retire.
Yeah.
So I felt we had somebody that was likely going to follow through with the consulting agreement. We structured an initial 90-day of so many hours, and so much of the purchase price was allocated towards that for the consulting, where they actually stayed on site during a specific period of time to help introduce us to the customers, get familiar with some of the products we weren't as familiar with, as well as some of the vendors. We also negotiated another 90 days where they were available by phone if need be, during a certain amount of time and hours, which they followed through with. And that worked out great from that perspective.
Yeah.
As far as earnouts, it really is specific to the industry. Certain industry earnouts are a big part of the transaction process. I come from that world in financial services. They certainly are. In others, maybe not as much. I'm just not as big a fan of earnouts because of the person coming in. I mean, that's part of what you're doing is that upside that you're looking to grow. But in particular, if you're concerned about accounts that are staying with you, an earnout might be appropriate. I tended to go a different direction in this case. We didn't need owner financing, but I still made sure that there was some owner financing because I wanted them to have some skin in the game. That
And
was
that
my
was in a
insurance policy, making sure
yeah.
they were going to stick around and follow through with what they said they were going to.
So it sounds like the way that you handled it is you had a portion of what you were going to pay for the business that you worked
Yeah.
into this consulting agreement to support. And then you also had them carry some amount in a seller note. So there was some ongoing skin in the game. Am I understanding that
Yeah,
right?
so we had more than sufficient capital to purchase the business,
Yeah.
which we could have done so. I purposely wanted a portion of it, and they were willing to carry a note for 5 years.
Great.
It happened to be at a fairly attractive interest rate. That didn't hurt. But my primary purpose of that note was an insurance policy to make sure that the owner was going to be around during at least the first 6 months and follow through with what they were going to say. And
Yeah.
these folks did anyway. Turned out not to be an issue from that standpoint. But I personally feel that even if you have the cash to buy something, a seller note to have some skin in the game for a short period of time doesn't hurt.
Well, and now you have some more cash sitting on the sidelines. It sounds like you're maybe going to use some of
Correct.
that to look at a second acquisition.
and interest rates ended up going north, which I had a sneaking suspicion they might
Yeah.
have. So I now have attractive financing that I can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. So you close this deal, David. Right now, we're only talking about all the rosy parts of this. So, what
Yeah.
parts did not go as expected? What things after you
Yes.
took over surprised you? What do you wish you would have known earlier? Walk us through some of that.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yep.
Coming into any transaction, I'll be candid. I look at things from the standpoint of like, okay, maybe we're only hearing half of it. What's the other half? And maybe it's somebody has an agenda. Maybe it's just they've been doing this so long they don't think twice to try and talk about something. And it is the buyer's responsibility to dig those things out. So I also was fairly familiar with that process. Coming into the business, I already saw what I would call red flags are. And all business is going to have some red flags, which I'm
Yep.
looking for deal killers. Deal killers, like the one that I started very early on with, a deal killer was real estate went with it, which is great, but there was oil and not in the good way.
Oh,
It was
under
from
the
a
property?
leaking underground tank that
Oh,
had gone through remediation, sort of. And I knew enough about that to go, hey, okay, this could, and it is a good business. It's still there today, but that's nothing I want any part of.
so that was a
That was a
business
deal
you walked
killer.
away from that
Yeah,
had,
I ended up walking away from it
yeah,
because, it's not the kind of oil you could sell somewhere else. It was going to cost you a lot of money.
yeah. What about
So
in
you're
this
looking for,
particular transaction? What were the surprises that came up, or the things that
I
didn't
wouldn't say
go?
actually in this one there were any huge surprises. What I
Okay.
thought were concerns proved to be accurate. Some of them took longer. That was a surprise. I had expected it, but just the amount of effort that in today's environment, things just move a lot slower in some cases. Unfortunately, that took a lot more work. I had a forklift that decided to die, which I knew was going to need
Oh,
replaced, but it went from
but
being
not so
okay
soon.
to needing replaced in a phone call. So that was a fun scramble to find a reasonably priced used forklift. That one would not think that would be an issue, but some equipment is hard to obtain at the right price
Well,
because it
especially
wasn't
coming out of
sold, a lot of
COVID
it.
when
Yeah,
so many pieces of equipment have been delayed by supply chain issues.
absolutely right. So that was a surprise for me. I went to acquire, a small box truck at the right price, and I ended up asking my, what happened to all the 2 to 3 year old trucks? And the gentleman is laughing. He goes, "You remember that thing called COVID?" I go, "Yeah," because we weren't selling any.
Hmm.
So there's certain items that weren't as accessible as they had been in the past. So that was a little bit of a surprise. We did end up running into a bump with the landlord, unfortunately. That was unfortunate, and the agreement wasn't followed. And that was a surprise. I would say that was the one big surprise, and that took some money to actually get sorted out, which was unfortunate, but it did get sorted out. As
Is
far as
there?
others, there weren't any huge surprises. It was just more, okay, this is going to take longer than I thought to try to correct, or things aren't quite as available, or who knew you'd have a problem finding a ship to get pasta to go on to come from Italy all the way to the United States,
Yeah.
or that you'd get charged a war surcharge for insurance premiums because they can't come through the Red Sea anymore.
What?
Things like that, you just learn along the way. You go, okay, that's a new one. Hadn't
Yeah.
expected that,
That
and you
wasn't in
just
my
roll with it.
financial model.
Yeah, I didn't really anticipate any of that, but you just learn to roll with it. That's the joys of having a business.
Well, the landlord issue, I'm curious,
Yeah.
in hindsight, is there anything you could have or would have done differently, or was this just a case of a landlord going off the rails per the agreement that you
In
assumed?
hindsight, so that agreement had been drafted by the landlord's attorney, and it was okay, and we knew that. And even my attorney said, it's okay, and it's fine. It's not great because I'd do something different here, or even just use a standard agreement. But I don't see any major problems here, which proved to be accurate. The problem was the landlord chose not to follow the agreement, and they chose to operate it. And I know enough because I've had commercial buildings myself, as well as obviously been tenant. to double check your triple net leases. Triple net can stand for a lot of things. So
Yeah.
it's best to audit your triple net and what you're being charged. And I found out we were getting charged for a number of things we weren't supposed to. And that's what led to the disagreement. So in hindsight, I probably would have put even more teeth into the part on the triple net, even though it was there, but I would have gotten even more granular with it.
Got it. But it sounds like it all worked out. You just had to probably spend a little extra of your time and a little extra of your money to get it all sorted out.
It cost me about $12,000. That wasn't
Okay.
unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Yeah. That's a pretty cheap lesson in our entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, it is. And it's one where you get into an agreement. I mean, unfortunately, legal contracts come down to it's a matter of yes, you have it, but it's also a matter of enforcing it.
Yep.
And enforcing it can get expensive. So I was able to fix it, and we ate part of it. That was 6 of it, and the other 6 in legal fees thereabouts. We'll call it a day, and we'll move on with life.
Yeah. Now, you're somebody who walked into this transaction process with a good amount of knowledge. I'm curious if there's anything
Yeah.
you learned in the process of closing and taking over this business that you learned something new from that you'd want to share with aspiring business owners.
Allow more time.
Allow more time. Say more about that.
Allow
Meaning
more
you
time.
built your pro forma and it said one thing, and then you got in and all of a sudden it became the Gumby of financial projections, or what?
No, I'm talking about the transaction itself and closing.
Oh, okay.
For whatever reason, we had an owner that wanted to expedite closing, which I immediately slowed the process down because that's a major red flag for me. If somebody wants to expedite things, why? Is there something here I missed? Is there something going on that
What
just
is
changed?
Yeah, what was the expedite time frame? So you came in with what time frame and what were they trying to push? Like help us understand what became the red flag.
Yeah, so there was a closing time frame that we had set out, and just due to a variety of things and moving funds around, it was going to take, I think, I don't know, an extra week. And they said no. So I had
Oh,
to, and you folks were very helpful, as well as the attorney you folks recommended on the ERISA side on expediting the review of a couple of things so that I could actually physically move money a little quicker than I had intended to actually comply with it. But that took a lot of effort and a lot of time. And in hindsight, I would have gone back to allow just a longer closing time. Or if the owner, for whatever reason, that was selling, if that was going to become a problem, probably probed at that time and find out why. Turned out to be in this case, it was a fear just over somebody wasn't going to follow through with doing the
yeah.
sale. But I didn't
So
learn that till months afterwards.
so let me play this back. So it sounds like you had a particular closing time frame in mind that you felt comfortable with. The seller pushed back
Right.
and wanted something shorter. You tried to
Correct.
accommodate that, and then you
Yep.
ran into some timing issues at the end and you asked for an extra week and they said no and you thought, "Whoa."
Exactly. So I wanted 30 extra days, and they said no. And if we were going to move forward with the purchase of this business, it was something we had to make happen. So I elected to go ahead and do it. And I didn't think a week would
Yeah.
be a big deal, and apparently it was. And so it caused, a great deal of effort and time quickly to get done, which it got
But
done in
you were
the
able to
end.
save the deal.
The other part is have backup plans for your pro formas. Obviously, things are going to happen as you jump into the business. So you'll want to make sure to do that.
So it sounds like you were able to save the deal. Is that the only time that the deal was at risk throughout the closing process, or did you have any other points in time where you had to work some magic to revive or save the deal from going off the rails?
That was the only time, and we almost didn't go through with it at that particular juncture. Trying to uncover what was really driving it, and unfortunately, had to have a tough conversation with the broker as well. But everything got taken care of, put together, and we got it resolved, and it got closed.
Great. And so the big learning for you is that this has taken a lot longer than you were expecting it to take to get where you wanted to go. Um, Anything you would do differently if you were to go back in time?
Certainly, I'd allow more time for that process rather than just, I'm used to making things happen. And sometimes it makes sense to go a little slower,
Was
if
that
that
just
makes
an
sense.
emotional expectation that you needed to reset, or was there something strategically that you would have done differently?
I wouldn't say strategically there's anything that I would have done differently as part of this transaction. I would say in particular post-COVID, just to have more patience and allow more time for things to actually happen. I was used to operating, and I know this sounds strange because we've now been post-COVID for a while, but the pace of trying to get things done in some cases was different pre-COVID. Whereas now, there's just more hurdles in place, or there's not enough staff out there, or, I'll give you an example. It's a product that we work with, it's handmade and it's made from stainless steel. Well, who would think that stainless steel is hard to come by at a given time? That then has an impact on manufacturing, which then has an impact on getting it here, which then has an impact on me being able to sell that product. So I would just, in particular, I'd say a lot more time. I would also say, well, I was very familiar with this process. Don't be afraid to engage other professionals and allocate enough money to do so. Getting good advice, you'll never regret getting good advice. Paying to fix something after the fact is very expensive. Whereas a little advice up front can go a long way, even if it costs you some money.
Well, David, this feels like maybe doing this backwards, but we've gone through this whole transaction journey. We haven't talked much about the business. So I'd love for you to explain. Tell us about the company that you purchased. Tell us about what you've started with and what your vision is for it and where you want to take it next.
No, that's a great question. So if we were sitting down, let's say 5 years from now, I'd like to see us substantially increase our revenue to 5 million, whereas we're sitting around 1.5 million now today. And someone goes, that's crazy to go from X to Y. Well, no, you actually have to have a business plan with certain metrics behind it, trying to accomplish certain things with certain numbers of accounts. But part of coming into this business wasn't just to grow something and grow it into something very large. It was also to create a certain culture for the employees in the organization. It was to stay focused in our lanes of distributing, fine Italian products. Well, what does that actually mean? What are the right products that need to come and be a part of that? All of those were decisions that we had to go through that process. So I guess if I was talking to somebody else, I would say, well, what do you want it to look like 5 years from now? What do you want that to look like in terms of sales, number of accounts? What do you want in terms of lifestyle? What type of culture do you want for your employees? All of that is something we've gone through and are currently going through. So, for example, we're going through a branding exercise right now where we've had to change our branding. So what does that look like? What do we want that to be? So I don't know that I've answered all of your full question there, but in terms of where we're going, we want to be at 5 million of sales. We're going to distribute throughout Oregon and Washington and have satellite accounts out in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska that we're using sub-distributor partners with. And we're going to stick with fine Italian coffee and other fine food.
David, where are you based out of? Where's the business based?
So we're based out of Portland, Oregon, just out in the suburbs here in Lake Oswego. And our two main hubs are in the Seattle metro market as well as Portland metro market. And I'd say we kind of travel the I-5 corridor with some satellite locations in other markets, obviously.
Great. Well, when you're ready to come to Idaho, let me know if there's anybody you want me to introduce you to here in Boise.
I definitely will. That's a great city out there.
David, thank you for taking the time. Is there anything I can do for you or any questions I can answer for you before I let you go?
No, not necessarily. I'd just like to say thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Create the Life You Want podcast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to future episodes by clicking the subscribe button, you know where. If you're an aspiring business owner, you may also want to subscribe to the Create the Life You Want newsletter for more inspiration and tips delivered to your inbox every week. You can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as on my personal website, jeremyames.com. If you've already decided you want to start or buy a business, consider exploring your financing options by heading to our sponsor's website at www.guidantfinancial.com. That's GUIDANT financial.com. See you in the next episode.